Andy, you've talked about the importance of narrative and in sharing our stories and helping youth to share their stories. But there are parts of that in giving them both the tools to share their stories, the language that we use to share our stories of faith, and also boundaries of the type of stories that are maybe appropriate for a youth minister to share, to be welcoming and vulnerable without burdening the people listening. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because I think it's something we get confused on often, and it's a kind of text we play into kind of youth work, where we think, well, you know, if I'm a really good youth worker then and youth pastor, then I should just be completely open to these kids and tell them these stories, and I need to tell them about all the dumb decisions I made when I was in college, and you start kind of giving all of this information. And I think it's a really good question. If we're really basing this on narration and telling our stories, are there some stories we shouldn't tell, or are there some things that we shouldn't share? And I think the answer to that is a very bold, underlined yes, that there are some things that we shouldn't share. And at first, I think hearing that response, you think, well, then you're hiding things, or you're not being completely honest. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, we tend to sometimes in this very simplistic framework think that honesty is full disclosure, but that's not true. I mean, all of us know this, like, to give a weird example of it, all of us know this in the context of our parents' relationship. Like, there's some information we do not want. That hearing stories by our parents talking about, like, their honeymoon night or their romantic escapades will lead us to vomit. Like, we don't want to hear that story. That is information, even as told as a story, that is not helpful for us to hear. Now, that may be an odd jump into thinking about youth ministry, but I think that there is certain information, certain stories that either are too sacred or are not, or could be used as a kind of power play that we simply should just not share with young people. And that doesn't mean that we're not open to them. That doesn't mean that we don't care for them. I mean, I think that we can live by this law that says your job is to be open. Your job is to tell things. And I don't think that that should set the terms for how we function and how we practice ministry. I think what should set the terms for this is the call of the gospel itself, which leads us to actually share and uphold and care for the concrete humanity of the young person. And some things that we share simply we do to make us seem important, to make us feel like we have the control of a situation or something like that, as opposed to recognizing that when one tells a story, there are other people who hear it. And maybe this is an interesting kind of cultural distinction that I think so often in our kind of context with Facebook and Twitter and all the other social networking sites and things, that they could be devices that allow us to narrate our lives and tell our stories, but often they're kind of superpower devices that allow us just to disclose information. And we tend not to think about, and this particularly happens with young people, tend not to think about the person who hears what we're putting out there. Like, young people will do this all the time, where they write something on their Facebook profile and then find out their boss read it and they're fired from their half-time job at Dairy Queen or something. And they never thought that there were other people out there that had heard it. And I think this is one of the things that a digital world has done to us, is that we have the capacity to tell stories and distribute those stories in a significant framework, but it cuts us off from recognizing there's another person who hears those stories. And I think this becomes a really important move that we help our young people, is to recognize that what kind of story are you going to tell that recognizes that there's a hearer of that story. But that starts with us. Like, there's some information that we shouldn't share because the person hearing it, it has no value for them, or it could be used over and against them, or it could be hurtful to them. And this is why I think a huge piece in all of pastoral ministry as we move forward is really helping people be emotionally astute. And unfortunately, in all forms of ministry, in all seminaries, really, there are very few seminaries that really give attention to the emotional intelligence and the emotional maturity of the people they send out into ministry. And I think this becomes a huge piece, is how can you discern what is a fair thing to say and what's not? And that really starts by being able to kind of empathically share in that other person's experience and to kind of stand with them as the hearer of this story. And I think we don't do a good enough job with that.